Symbiosis is just the idea of how living things are interacting with each other in different ecosystems and different environments. There are three main types of symbiotic relationships. The first one is called mutualism, and that's the one where both species are benefiting. So both are getting their needs met somehow, or are being helped from the other organism. Commensalism is the one where one species is being benefited, or they're getting something that they need, but the other one is not being affected, it's not being helped, but it's also not being hurt. Parasitism is the third, and that's the one where one species is benefiting, but the other one is actually being hurt or harmed in some way. So the first example of a mutualistic relationship would be sea otters and kelp. So the little otters are these cute little furry critters that will sleep in the water. A lot of times they hold hands with one another while they're sleeping so they don't float away from their little friends. When they are just floating, though, the problem is that they can just float off with the waves, and so they need to try to stay put somehow. The way they do that is they find kelp that's growing from the sea floor, and they wrap their arms and legs in it, and so it kind of acts like an anchor. It's kind of like they're attached to a rope, and so yes, they can move back and forth a little bit, but they're not going to completely float away. Another nice thing for the otters is that sea urchins a lot of times will try to eat kelp. So as they're sitting there, it's kind of like somebody is bringing them bedtime snacks. So the sea urchins are coming up and they're trying to eat the kelp, and then the otters can just eat the urchins as they're floating through the kelp. It also helps the kelp because those sea urchins would kill the kelp, and so the otters are now going through and they're actually eating the predator for the kelp, or they're eating what would eat the plant. The next kind is a cleaner fish and a moray eel. So they're these tiny little fish that will swim inside an eel's mouth, and they will pick off all of the little dead and decaying scraps of food inside the eel's mouth. So the problem for the eel is that it would kind of have an issue where it's trying to be able to clean its mouth or try to prevent bacteria from being an issue, and it doesn't have any way to clean it on its own. So the moray eel is getting a clean mouth, and the cleaner fish is getting a free meal that it didn't really have to hunt for. On this one, there is this little deer-like creature called the chital, and the tree pie is the bird. So that deer-like creature needs to get that velvet stripped from their antlers, and the tree pie likes to eat that. So what ends up happening is that the tree pie gets that free meal, and then the chital doesn't have to go out and try to rub that velvet off of their antlers. There's another one, it's called lichen, which is a fungus-covered algae. Algae would end up getting really dried out and would die without something covering it to protect it and keep the moisture in. Fungus cannot make its own food, so it has to absorb nutrients from something else. So fungus grows over the algae, absorbs its nutrients, and then the algae is getting the moisture contained and it doesn't dry up. You'll see this a lot on trees. You'll see it also a lot on boulders. If you go to Colorado and go hiking, it's kind of like the green parts of the rocks. Another one is called a swollen thorn acacia tree, and then an ant. So they're both benefiting because the ant has a happy, safe place to lay its eggs, and the eggs are protected by the thorns. So any bird that would try to come along and kind of eat the insects would get poked by the thorns, and then it would kind of fly away. But the plant also gives the ant babies this little, it's kind of like a sap almost, that the ant babies will eat. So the ants are obviously happy. They're protected. They're getting free food. But the acacia tree is also happy because when an animal comes to try to eat the tree itself, the ants have no idea that it's there to eat the tree. They assume the animal's there to eat the babies. So they attack whatever animal it is, and it kind of drives them away, which in essence protects the tree from those predators as well. The next two are examples of commensalism. This is where one is benefiting and one is not being affected at all. So this cattle egret and a cow. On this one, the cattle egret, it's the bird, and it's not eating ticks. It's just eating different things like grasshoppers or items that don't affect the cow in any negative way. But when the cow lays down or walks around, it kicks up all of these animals or these insects, and all of these insects fly up, allowing that bird to easily find and eat them. The cow is not affected because the bird is not bugging the cow, and those insects are not injuring or biting the cow either. So cow's not affected, but the cattle egret, kind of like having a piñata at a party. When that cow lays down, it like busts open the insect piñata, and then it just can eat whatever it'd like. Another example of commensalism is the oak gall wasp and the oak tree. So this wasp will go and they will actually sting the branch of an oak tree, and it's not hurting the oak tree at all, but it does make it bubble up just a little bit. That bubble is what they will lay the eggs inside. The wasp will lay the eggs inside, and then it protects those larvae until they're large enough to be able to protect themselves, and then they kind of chew their way through and just kind of go out, and they're nice and fully grown now. And I always kind of say that with the oak tree, it's almost like if you are scratching at something on your arm, you may have a little bit of a redness that shows up, but it's not breaking the skin, it's not causing an infection, it just is a reddening of your skin. For the oak tree, that bubble is just a little bubble. It's not harming it. It's not going to cause any major complications, but it does definitely help the wasp. The next three are the kinds that are called parasitism. This is the one where one species or organism is benefiting and the other is actually being hurt in some way. So bed bugs are a nocturnal parasite that will come out, and they are kind of like a mosquito that will bite and feed off of the blood of a host. So when that happens, they're getting a free meal, but the host that has been bit will usually get an itchy rash, or maybe an infection can happen because of the bite. And so that organism is actually being hurt. This one, the mistletoe plant, is actually an aerial parasite. It cannot make its own glucose or its own food, so it steals the nutrients from a tree. So it kind of floats through the air, just kind of like leaves do in the fall, and then they attach to a tree, stick their roots into that tree, and then just steal all of the nutrients that the tree is making for itself. Eventually, the tree will die, and then the mistletoe has to find a new host, but the mistletoe, while it's growing on that tree, is benefiting because it is getting the nutrients that it needs in order to live. Last example would be tapeworms. So when you think about anytime a dog or a cat has fleas, which a lot of animals can get that, they're at risk for developing tapeworms. That's why we give them something called a preventative. That prevents these animals from being able to grow inside your pet. So really what happens, like for the cucumber tapeworm, is they will lay eggs when they're in the stomach of an animal. It passes out through the feces or the poop of that animal, and then an insect like a flea may land on the poop, may ingest some of those eggs, and then the eggs are just sitting inside that flea's stomach until that flea lands on a dog or a cat and starts biting it. Well, when the dog or the cat is uncomfortable, it doesn't a lot of times only scratch with its hand or its paw. It will scratch by biting at itself. And just like if you've ever been running and you accidentally swallow a gnat, that happens sometimes for your dogs. But, they're biting at their skin and they end up accidentally swallowing one of those fleas. Well, when that flea gets into the dog's stomach, the flea is killed, but the eggs that were inside the flea are now where they wanted to be, which is inside the pet's stomach. And so then what happens is that tapeworm grows, and then it has to steal the nutrients that the dog eats. So when your dog or your cat, not necessarily yours, but a dog or cat, are eating, the nutrients that they need to fuel their body aren't going to fuel their body. They're going to fuel that tapeworm and make that tapeworm bigger. And a tapeworm can have lay thousands of eggs a day. And so then it passes out through that pet's, poop, and then another organism, like another flea, eats it, lands on another dog, and then that dog eats it, and the cycle just kind of keeps continuing. So as a quick reminder, the three types were mutualism, where both are benefiting or getting something they need; commensalism, where one is benefiting and the other is not bothered; and then the third is parasitism, where one is benefiting but the other one is definitely being harmed.